My precious Savior suffered pain and agony. He bore it all, that I might live. I with him might live. He broke the bonds of sin and set the captive free. He bore it all, that I might live. In his presence live. He bore it all, that I might see his shining face. He bore it freely all, bore it all, that I might live. I with him might live. I stood condemned to die, but Jesus freely took my place. He bore it all, that I might live. In his presence live. They placed a crown of thorns upon my Savior's head. He bore it all, that I might live. I with him might live. By cruel men with spear his side was pierced and bled. He bore it all, that I might live. In his presence live. He bore it all, that I might see his shining face. He bore it freely all, bore it all, that I might live. I with him might live. I stood condemned to die, but Jesus freely took my place. He bore it all, that I might live. In his presence live. Up Calvary's hill in shame the blessed Savior trod. He bore it all, that I might live. I with him might live. Between two thieves they crucified the Son of God. He bore it all, that I might live. In his presence live. He bore it all, that I might see his shining face. He bore it freely all, bore it all, that I might live. I with him might live. I stood condemned to die, but Jesus freely took my place. He bore it all, that I might live. In his presence live. Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away to a home on God's celestial shore. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. When the shadows of this life have grown, I'll fly away. Like a bird from prison bars have flown, I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. Just a few more weary days and then I'll fly away to a land where joy shall never end. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away.
Brightly beams our Father's mercy from his lighthouse evermore, but to us he gives the keeping of the lights along the shore. Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the way. Some poor fainting, struggling seaman, you may rescue, you may save. Dark the night of sin has settled, loud the angry billows roar. Eager eyes Stars are watching, longing for the lights along the shore. Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the way. Some poor fainting, struggling seaman, you may rescue, you may save. Trim your feeble lamp, my brother. Some poor sailor, tempest tossed, trying now to make the harbor, in the darkness may be lost. Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the way. Some poor fainting, struggling seaman, you may rescue, you may save. How do you explain, how do you describe a love that goes from east to west and runs as deep as it is wide? You know all our hopes, Lord, you know all our fears, and words cannot express the love we feel, but we long for you to hear. So listen to our heart, please listen. Hear our spirit sing, hear us sing a song of praise, a simple song of praise. Those who have read, those who have read, we will use the words we know to tell you what an awesome God you are. But words are not enough to tell you of our love, so listen to our heart. If words could fall like rain from these lips of mine, and if I had 1,000 years, Lord, I would still run out of time. If you listen to my heart, every knee will say, thank you for the life, thank you for the truth, thank you for the way. So listen to our heart, please listen. Hear our spirit sing, hear us sing a song of praise, a simple song of praise. Those who have read, those who have read, we will use the words we know to tell you what an awesome God you are. But words are not enough to tell you of our love, so listen to our heart. So listen to our heart, please listen. Hear our spirit sing, and hear us sing a song of praise, a simple song of praise. Those who have read, those who have read, we will use the words we know to tell you what an awesome God you are. But words are not enough to tell you of our love, so listen to our hearts. Words are not enough to tell you of our love, so listen to our hearts.
Oh, listen to our wondrous story, counted once among the lost. Yet one came down from heaven's glory, saving us at awful cost. who saved us from eternal loss. But God's Son upon the cross, what did he do? He died for you. Where is he now? Leave it thou in heaven, intercede.
Good morning. Welcome to the Sunday morning adult class for Broad Street Church of Christ in Lexington, Tennessee. I got to thinking about that. You know, you go online, you never know where somebody's watching from. So just give you the whole thing. I didn't say in the USA. So we'll assume they know that by my Southern English. When I made the comment last week that the next time I got up here we'd be doing Salt and Light, I really wasn't thinking it'd be quite this soon. But with the passing of Joyce's father, and we're really sad about that, I called or sent Rex a text, said, "Got enough on your mind? I'll go ahead and we'll do a little something on Sunday morning." And that's what we're going to do. Matthew chapter 5. We're going to continue with the Sermon on the Mount. And whether it is a single sermon that was delivered at this one time, one place, or whether this is a compilation of things that Jesus wanted his disciples to know and to practice, really doesn't matter that much, because Matthew does an excellent job of presenting these ideas that Jesus had for his disciples. And beginning in verse 13, where we are today, is where we start, then Jesus is going to tell his disciples how he wants them to display their discipleship. And that is where we begin with salt and light. You are the salt of the earth. And if a salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing, only to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. What does salt do? It preserves, okay? All right, it flavors. That's the very two things that I wanted. Y'all are doing real good. Y'all stay right there. Don't leave. It preserves and it flavors, okay? Now, a lot of you guys are hunters, so I wanted to tell you this before we got started too far. Two hunters are talking, and one of them is describing the load that he uses in his rifle. And he describes how much gunpowder he puts in it, how many ounces of lead he puts in it. And he says, the last thing that I do is I add just a little salt to that bullet. And the other guy says, why in the world do you add salt? And he says, well, something's got to preserve that meat until I can get to it. So he obviously was a pretty good shot from a long distance. But it's a preservative. It's something that's used to keep your meat. We used to, I'll tell you about my childhood. We used to kill hogs, and we'd cut them up, put them in the meat box, and we'd cover them up with salt. And my dad was great at this. He could salt down hams, and we'd have hams for the rest of the year. In fact, by the end of the year, Harold Griggs or somebody else would come to him and say, you got any hams left? And he'd maybe have one, maybe two, because I didn't like ham. I was more of a fatback person myself. But we'd eat that all year long. And that was as a preservative. So Jesus is saying, I need you to be a preservative for our culture. You're going to be tasteful. In other words, you add flavor to our culture. That's one of the things about Christianity. We should be a little different. We shouldn't act like everybody else. And when you are around a Christian, you usually know you're around a Christian. I've worked in a lot of different situations and a lot of different locations. And when you suddenly end up working around someone who's a Christian, it's not really hard to figure that out by the way they act, the way they talk, the standards that they use for their daily activities. It's pretty easy to figure out exactly that you are talking to someone who is a lot like you. So, you are the salt of the earth. Salt was also very valuable during this time. When Jesus was living on the earth, Roman soldiers actually on occasion got paid with salt. So it was a commodity that they could take with them, and it was worth a lot. But let's imagine that you are a soldier and you receive a pound of salt for your wages this month, and you take it home and you cut it. Take half of it, and the other half you fill with, say, cornmeal. You cut it up. I don't know exactly how much cornmeal it would take to make it where it wasn't salty anymore. But he might take that pound of salt, cornmeal, and use that to pay a debt. When someone else comes along, they take that's already half salt and they cut it again. Now it's only a quarter salt, but they mix it with something else. They cut it. Eventually, it's going to get where it doesn't have any salty flavor. Now, if you've ever been around somebody that's on a salt-free diet, and you realize what something actually tastes like without salt, terrible. But you can add just a little bit, that helps some. But if you add a lot, that really helps. That makes it taste really good. So that was something that he was saying. This is something that you need to remember. You're flavorful. You're a preservative. But if you as a Christian or as a disciple of his, as he's saying now, if you're my disciple and you lose your saltiness, what good are you? Worthless. Same thing happens in our society today. If you're a Christian and you lose your Christianity or your Christian actions, the way that you conduct yourself, then what are you? Jesus says, worthless. You can call yourself a Christian, but if you don't act like a Christian, you don't live by Christian standards, then you have become salt that is unsalty. And unsalty doesn't do anything except throw it out on the path, and it serves as nothing. Well, as what? As a weed killer, okay. That's good enough for me. A weed killer. Verse 14, continuing in that thought. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp, put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. How many times in the Bible can you think of, and I don't even want to, this is a rhetorical question, so this does not require any audience participation. But think about the number of times in the Bible that godliness is compared to light. It's a lot. Somebody's probably going to run it through Google and tell me there are 833 references to light in the New Testament. But somewhere in there, there are a lot of comparisons between godliness and light. And Jesus says, if you're a Christian, I'm going to paraphrase this one, make it a little bit longer. If you're a Christian, then you are like a city set on a hill. You are a light set on a lampstand. You are illumination for everybody you come in contact with. Now, to put that another way, you're going to have an influence on everybody you come in contact with. All right? Now, I'm going to use me for an example for a second. If I go out here on Saturday night and I'm a raving lunatic, high on drugs or alcohol or whatever it is, and everybody sees me at the bar or they see me wherever I happen to be, and then they know that I come in here on Sunday morning and I try to teach this class, what effect does that have on the church? Not just me, I'm talking about the church. Bill, what does that do?
Anybody that sees that will say, I ain't never stepped a foot in there.
Right. I don't need that. If it doesn't change him, then it's not going to help me, is it? They're going, yeah. It literally tears the church down for me to act like that and for people to see me act like that, because I am supposed to be a light. What good is a light? Well, the only thing that you can use light for is you put it up on a lampstand and it illuminates the room. And if it doesn't illuminate the room, then it's more like this other, you've put it under a bushel. Okay? You have covered it up. You're just like everybody else. Any comments on that? I'll take a second to let you catch up. Yes, sir.
Is good, but there's more subtle examples. How we work at work and treat people we work with.
Okay.
Do the same thing at the church and being an obvious rebel, you know.
Okay.
If you don't work in a Christian attitude, you're always down in the company or whatever, and then you come in here to church and people says, well, if that's what a Christian is, I'm as good or better than they are. I don't mean it.
All right. Whatever you do in word or deed, all in the name of the Lord. You give it your very best, right? Okay. And people see that. All right. Why don't you slack off with everybody else? Well, because he's paying me for an hour's worth of work. I'm going to give him an hour's worth of work. All right. Anything else?
A light shows the way.
It does. A light shows the way. And I honestly think that we reach more people when they see our life than we do when we go out and knock on doors. All right. The people that know you and know what kind of person you are, a lot of times someone will come to you and say, what makes you the way you are? Why do you act the way that you do? Why don't you act like everybody else? And a lot of times that causes you to have the opportunity to say that God is part of my life. Jesus is part of my life. And I want to be a Christian. And a lot of times that opens up doors. And I think that one of the best examples that we can do is to set a good example and to show that you are a light and you are salt. And people will want to know more about the way that you live.
We're a lot like the moon. We don't show our own light, but we're a reflection.
Okay.
Of what Christ is.
Larry makes a statement, we're like the moon. It's not our own light. We are a reflection of God's love, God's light. So that's true as well. Okay. Verse 17. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, nor the least stroke of a pen will be by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Stop right there. 18. Someone read me the King James Version of that. Tyler, you got it.
It says, for verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass one jot or one tittle, shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled.
I've always heard that, that's like saying that the law is not going to pass until everything has been completed, until every T is crossed and every I is dotted. I got curious. I've always heard the tittle, so I wanted to find out what a tittle was. All right? So there was an example in the book that I read, and one of the letters was almost like a 7, and told me what it meant. I didn't bother to remember that. but it was like a little 7. And there was a little 7 with a little tail on it, right at the very top, which was the tittle. And it had an entirely different meaning. Now, if you're really curious, you can look that up and find out what the difference is. But that's a tittle. It's a very teeny tiny mark right at the very top. And because we write in English, we would not very well pay any attention to it, so it wouldn't have meant a whole lot to us. But every jot, every tittle was going to be accomplished. What did Jesus mean by that?
Complete.
Complete. In other words, you think, or you may think, that I'm here to destroy the law. I'm going to get rid of it. It's literally he did. But let's go with that fact. You think that I'm here to destroy the law. I've come along with something new. But he says, I'm telling you for a fact that the entire law is going to be completed. All the law, all the prophets. Everything's going to be completed before the end of his time. In Hebrews, what does it say about what happened to the old law?
Nailed to the cross.
Nailed to the cross. It was done away with. It was literally completed. All of those things that are prophecies about Jesus Christ were completed. They were done away with. If you take the Bible as a whole, you can literally watch this. You start at the very beginning of the Bible, Adam and Eve. It's a thread that goes all the way through the Bible. And it's always going to what? What was it? Everything in the Old Testament, the entire thread leads to what?
Jesus Christ.
All right, Jesus Christ, the Messiah. In other words, He's going to be coming. The Messiah is going to be here. He's going to be the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. And then at the end of His life, He completes the law and the prophets. The old law is nailed to the cross, and the new law, the new covenant, the new will and testament that Jesus has came into effect. He's saying here, I'm not here to destroy the law. I'm here to complete it. And that's what He did. Therefore, verse 19, therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Wow. What a terrible thing to say. Who knows more about, let's go to first century. Who knows more about the law and who knows more about living godly lives than anybody else? The Pharisees. Why? The scribes are included in this. Why do they know so much?
They write the law.
They write the law. They're the writers. These are the guys that are in the everyday thinking. These are the guys that know more about God's will and God's law than anybody that ever walked on the face of the earth. They're closer to God than anybody will ever imagine. And Jesus says, unless your righteousness is greater than that, you won't even be allowed into the kingdom of heaven. Now, let me drop back just a little bit. Here's something I do not understand, and I'm sure there will be some comment about this. Anyone who sets aside the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. If you take that literally, you would be saying, all right, I taught that you can kill. And I think you ought to believe what I said. So you can kill and get away with it. And if I complete that thought, it says I'll be the least in the kingdom of heaven. I had a preacher one time made the statement, he didn't care if he just barely made it but 1 foot into heaven, he just wanted to get there. I don't think he means here that that person that teaches something against the law is still going to make it to heaven. Do you?
The amazing thing, Travis, there are things in the law, just like the Ten Commandments, not all of them. Many of them were carried forward into the New Testament.
All of
So,
them.
you know, I hear people say, oh, this has all been done away with. Not necessarily. You know, so it's important for us to examine those scriptures.
All right.
That's it.
In fact, we're about to jump right into that. All right. That's the next step of what we're fixing to do. He's going to take the Ten Commandments, or part of them. He's going to take the Ten Commandments and he's going to bring them into the new law, the new covenant. But I really don't think he's saying, I think it's here I've said, I don't like to do that either. The very words came out of my mouth, I think, and that's usually not very important. What I think and $1 will get you a larger drink at McDonald's. But I think he's doing a relative thing here. If you want to be great, you want to do the things that God wants you to do, then you're going to follow the practices and the teachings and the commands. But to not do that is going to slide you all the way back down the scale to something you really don't want. But whatever, I think that may be a hard passage to interpret. And as Justin Rogers told me one time, sometimes the best answer is I don't know. I will go with I don't know exactly what he means right there. But he's saying, yes, sir.
Travis, what ago, I think you answered that when you was telling us back earlier how we should light, how our lights should shine, how we should live, how if we didn't do that, if we didn't have a salt, if we didn't what would be, we'd be worth nothing. Okay, then he's saying if your life is like that, if you do what you just got to say a while ago, then you won't do this. But if you don't do that, if your light don't shine, if you don't have this, then you're no better than they are.
Okay. Good point. Eddie says if our light doesn't shine, we're not going to be any better than everybody else, right?
The Pharisees of the sky.
Okay. Pharisees, okay, even the scribes and Pharisees.
And Travis, I think your emphasis there on 19, I think, well, here I say I think again, but I would say you are correct in that the emphasis there is that last statement. Because he's contrasting things that would be considered minimal, least commandments, things that maybe most people will think are not important or whatever. And he's saying, if you do them and teach those, you'll be considered great in the kingdom. So the emphasis is, if it's a commandment from God, whether we as people think it's important or not doesn't really matter.
And that's going to come into play in the next section of the passages as well. What we think really doesn't matter. Keep that one stored away in the back of your mind, because that's going to be important. What we think really doesn't matter. It's what God says. Okay? Let's jump to verse 21. You have heard that it was said long ago of people, you shall not murder. Oh, that's one of the 10 big ones, isn't it, Rick?
Yeah.
All right. Someone who murders will be subject to the judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or a sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or a sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of hellfire. We'll stop there before we continue on. Thou shalt not murder, one of the 10 biggies. And they were really strict on it. Let's go with scribes and Pharisees. Thou shalt not murder. Okay. We believe that. We'll hold to that. Anyone who commits that act deserves to die. And they're in their laws. They're subject to the judgment, and that judgment is harsh. Okay? But he says, let me tell you, what he is going to say in the next section, where we're beginning right now, is that it's not the act that is the most important. It is the attitude that you bring. Okay? Just remember that. This is action versus the attitude. And in Christianity, the attitude is almost as important as the action. If the action is a sin, the attitude is also a sin. It may not be one of the big ones, but it's still a sin. Are there any little sins?
No.
All right, no. A sin is a sin. A sin is to miss the mark. A sin is to not do what God says. So, yeah, a sin is a sin. But to them, murder was one of the big ones. And he's saying, not only is murder a sin, but there are other things that are sin as well. To hate your brother or your sister is to make you subject to the judgment. To say raka, that's always been funny to me. I've never said raka to anybody. Okay? Now I have said words that are very close to it. All right? Nitwit. It's very close to what raka means. Okay? If you call somebody a nitwit, that's right. In other words, raka was a term that they used to insult somebody's intelligence. Okay? You're just nitwit. You don't have any idea about what's going on. You don't understand. You got the intelligence of a bullfrog. Anything like that. It's some kind of a statement to reference somebody's intelligence. Continuing on with that, anyone who says you fool, now to call someone a fool is to assault, is a reference to their character. One is their intelligence, raka. The other is you fool, which is a reference to your character. In other words, you never make good decisions. Everything that you do is foolish. Everything that you do is a mistake. Everything that you do is worthless. Even back into Proverbs, there's a lot in Proverbs about dealing with fools. And usually, if you boil it down, to argue or to wrestle with a fool is to beat your head against a brick wall, because you were never going to accomplish anything. So, if you are doing these things, then you are sinning. It's your attitude. Jerry, I'm not going to pick on you. Johnny, I just hate you. Every time we get out on the golf course, you do something that just irritates the far out of me.
Good.
Okay? He likes that. All right? It makes him feel good. All right? So, but I keep that bottled up. Okay? I keep that bottled up. I don't share that with everybody. Well, I have that against a brother. I don't need to do that, because that gives me an attitude that's causing me to sin. Now, if I ever really get upset, I call him a nitwit, then I've gone a step further. Now, instead of it just being internalized with me, I've shared it with him. You don't understand anything that I say or do. You're just a nitwit. And then it continues on. I call someone a fool. I don't respect anything you say, do, or expect out of you. In other words, I just really have nothing to do with you. It'd be a waste of my time. All right. Any other comments about that? Good. Well, we moved right through that one. I bet I don't get that one on the next group. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and reconcile to them, then come and offer your gift. Sacrifices. We apply these now to prayers. But in those days, they went to the temple and they took their sacrifices. What were those sacrifices supposed to do? Why sacrifice? Were they just doing that because they culling out their animals?
Cover their sins.
What?
Cover their sins.
Cover their sins. Very good. God commanded it. If you have sin in your life, you need to bring a lamb, a year old, without spot or without blemish. Bring it to the priest. He will offer it on the altar for your sins. And let me draw you a scenario here. I can almost see this happen. All right. Here is Joe.
Yeah.
That's got a lamb under his arm. And he's standing in line waiting to get to the priest to make the sacrifice. And he remembers that Bill, I'm coming up with names now, that Bill and he have had a real falling out. All right. The lamb represents his duty. He has a duty to go to the priest with this lamb and give it to the priest so that he can sacrifice it and he can cover those sins with the blood of that lamb. But now he remembers while he's in that line that Bill and he have really had a falling out. The spirit of the sacrifice is to leave that sacrifice there. Sam in the back behind the line can hold him for you. Leave the sacrifice there and go to your brother Bill and work out your problem. Now the attitude there is you have a duty to God to cover those sins. But you need to take care of it before you complete your duty. Isn't that true today? If I'm having a problem with somebody, say Arnez and I are just not getting along, and I come to church, Arnez, I sit on that side because you sit on this side. Because I really don't want to be in the same pew as you because we just don't get along. Okay? So I sit over there and every now and then I'll glance over there and I'll stew a little bit because we just aren't on the same page. We just don't jihad, as my dad used to say. But what's that doing to my worship? What does that do to my prayers? What does that do to the influence that I have on other people? Why? Y'all can't even get along with one another. Why do I want to get involved in something like that? So the best thing to do is to take care of that as soon as possible. In other words, if he has done something that's upset me, I need to go tell him that he's done something to upset me. Let's find out why he did it. And maybe I misunderstood completely. Or maybe he didn't realize that I was upset and he wants to change that. And whatever it takes, let's be friends. Let's get along. Let's be Christians. Yes, sir.
You know, and you just touched on it, and I think it's really interesting that the burden of obligation is on me if I've offended somebody. And they've got something against me. The burden is on me to go to them. The burden is also on me if they've offended me to go to them. So if we always look at conflict in that way, where whether I offended them or they offended me, it's my responsibility to try to make it right. When we all did that, I think many conflicts would be dealt with.
Oh, absolutely. And the quicker a conflict is handled, the less problem it is. All right? In other words, if I sit there and stew for a year, then it just gets bigger and bigger and boils up inside of me. It's causing me ulcers. That ain't bothering Arnez at all. Okay? But it's causing me ulcers because I just can't let it go. So the sooner you take care of it, the better it is, the faster it happens, the sooner it's over with. Then he says, once you've done that, once you've completed that obligation, then come back to the altar. Let Sam give you your lamb, and then go sacrifice it. Because now you're getting something accomplished. Okay? All right. Verse 25. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge. The judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, or verily I say, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. Applying that to what we were already talking about. In other words, the sooner you can take care of it, the better it will be. Here is an example of someone who's being carried off to the judge. In other words, I have a grievance against you, and I've grabbed you up. We're headed off to the judge. He's going to decide one way or the other. He says the best way to handle that is for y'all to work it out yourself. He gets into 1 Corinthians. What does he tell them about going to the judge, one Christian and another Christian? Don't do it. In 1 Corinthians, he said, isn't there anybody in the church smart enough to judge between your problems so that you don't have to go to some judge who is not a Christian and have him settle it? Isn't there somebody inside the church that is smart enough and wise enough to handle that problem? And that's exactly what he's saying here. He says, because if you let that go on, then you may have a judgment against you. And the very last verse of that we read, verse 26, you're going to pay every single penny. In other words, you're going to be held accountable for everything that comes up. Boy, I timed this perfectly. Because I've got about 10 minutes, and I don't think y'all can get me tied in a knot over what we're fixing to read. Verse 27. This one you hear a lot about. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. Another one of those big ones. Okay? But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out, throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off, throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Wow. I'm glad to see that everybody here has got two eyes, okay, and two hands. This is not a literal thing, okay? Let's go back to the idea. It's the attitude as well as the action. In other words, to commit adultery was a terrible thing. That was the act that would cause you to sin. Jesus says your attitude will also cause you to sin. The act of adultery, yes, terrible, bad. But to look on a woman and lust after her, and the idea here is, I would do something if I could get away with it. All right, if no one would ever know. Oh boy. All right, that's exactly the attitude that he's giving here. If I could do this and nobody would ever know, then I would.
Are we all guilty, Travis?
Oh, there's a good question. Yeah, we might ought to ask Jimmy Carter that. I think that got him in a little trouble. Before I answer that one, let's see what Bill wants to throw into the conversation.
Well, I was just going to, you saying that and then him Jesus transitioned into the plucking out your eye or cutting off your hand.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to leave that for just a second.
Okay.
All
All
right,
right.
okay. Are we all guilty? Come on. I'll tell you something that a Bible school teacher taught me when I was at Mid-South Youth Camp. I think I was 14 years old. He said, you can't stop the blackbirds from landing in the trees, but you can keep them from building a nest. All right? You can apply that any way you want to. There are things that you see that you just can't unsee. But it's not something that you dwell on. It's not something that you go in your mind over and over and over again until it builds into that desire that if I could do it, I could get away with it. Yeah.
I think relating to what you just said right there, David, when he was on the housetop,
Uh-huh.
and he looked down and he saw Bathsheba, if he had done the thing he ought to have done, he would have been out in the field with his army to start with. But beyond that, right then, had he turned around and went back, I think he would have been okay.
Been all right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Bill. Eyes and hands. My eye offends me. Man, I have seen this beautiful woman and caused her to lust at it. I'll pluck out my eye. My left eye still sees her. It hasn't changed a thing. Okay? When you go into the Islamic states, you steal something, what do? Cut off your hand. They take this literally. Cut it off. I can cut off my right hand and cast it away. I can steal with my left hand. All right? In other words, the idea here is look at yourself and decide what you're going to put into your body. Make a decision literally. Am I going to dwell on this? Am I going to allow it to rule my life? Am I going to let this be something that changes the way that I am or the way that I should be? Or is this something that, like I said, I can keep the blackbirds from building a nest in the trees? It's something I can pass off. But he's saying, think about it this way. It would be better to not even have that part of your body than it would be to let that cause you to sin and have the whole body go to hell. Yes, sir?
Yeah, and the emphasis seems to be that we need to be willing to do whatever it takes to get away from that sin. Changing friend groups, quitting your job and getting a different job. You begin to be attracted to someone you're working with and you need to get away from that. Whatever it is.
Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes.
Right. What did Joseph do when Potiphar's wife kept coming after him time after time after time? What did he do?
He ran.
He ran. Literally ran so fast that he came out of his coat. That's the attitude. I will do whatever it takes to keep me from doing that act. I will do whatever it takes to keep me from sinning against God. And if it takes, see, he goes to the extreme here. If it takes plucking out an eye, if it takes cutting off a hand, it would be worth it. That's what he was saying. It would be worth it to still be in a godly situation. All right. That got us right down to divorce, which I would not dream of starting a discussion on divorce with 1 minute to go, right? So, the next time, whenever that is, I will start with verse 31, and you can come loaded for bear, because I know you'll have a lot of stuff you want to say. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate it.